The 2024 election, it wasn't just decided at the ballot box, not even close. It was really shaped by this just record-shattering flood of money. We're talking billions of dollars, all designed to influence your vote. So that kind of raises a huge question, right?
Where did all that cash actually come from? Well, trying to trace the source of that influence, it's harder than ever. And that's because a huge chunk of it is specifically designed to be hidden. So to really get how this all works, we've got to start with the sheer scale of this secret spending. And it all kicks off with one pretty staggering number.
$1.9 billion. Just let that sink in. That is the record-breaking amount of what's called dark money that poured into the election. And what's really fascinating about this number isn't just how massive it is, it's where it came from.
So that entire $1.9 billion, it came from sources that are legally kept secret. Donors whose identities are completely hidden from you, from me, from everyone. So let's turn on the lights. In this explainer, we are going to pull back the curtain and really dig into how this whole new world of campaign finance actually works.
Okay, first things first. To really get the impact here, you have to appreciate the sheer scale of it all. The amount of money being spent by these so-called outside groups, the ones that aren't officially part of a candidate's campaign, it has just absolutely exploded.
Just look at this. This chart really shows the turning point. If you go back to 2008, outside spending was around $574 million. Okay, but then came the Supreme Court's big 2010 Citizens United decision. That's the one that basically said corporations and unions can spend unlimited money on elections. And the result? Well, by 2024, that number just skyrocketed to $4.5 billion. That's almost an 8-fold increase. It completely reshaped our elections. So the big question is, who exactly is behind this flood of cash?
Right, so if there's more money than ever before, who's spending it? Let's put some actual names and faces to these crazy numbers because we are seeing a whole new era of political power players emerge.
This whole landscape is now basically dominated by two major forces. On one hand, you've got these individual mega donors. We're talking ultra-wealthy people writing just massive checks. And on the other, you have entire industries that are strategically pouring money into races to shape policy in their favor. Let's start with the biggest individual donor of them all.
$291 million. That's what Elon Musk contributed in total. That one number made him the single largest political donor in American history. I mean, his spending was so huge, he was even outsourcing things like get-out-the-vote operations in swing states directly to his super PAC. That's a whole other level.
But, that kind of influence, it came with a price tag. After getting a lot of pressure from Tesla investors and some tensions with the Trump administration, Musk came out and said he was going to scale it all back. Okay, so that's the mega donor side. Now let's pivot and look at that other major force, entire industries.
And this right here, this shows a completely new playbook. In 2024, the crypto industry, of all things, became the single most aggressive corporate spender in politics. They accounted for almost half of all corporate money going to political action committees, PACs. But what's really fascinating isn't just that they spent it, but how they spent it. It was totally different from the old guard.
So let's compare the strategies here. You take an industry like fossil fuels, they follow a really traditional partisan model, right? They overwhelmingly back one party and they're aiming for broad deregulation. The crypto industry, though? Totally different. They were surgically precise and bipartisan. They didn't care if you were a Democrat or a Republican. If you were friendly to their very specific regulatory goals, you got their money. Super issue-focused.
So you might be sitting there thinking, how is any of this even possible? How does it work? Well, let's break down the actual mechanics that allow for this massive and often anonymous flow of cash into our elections.
Okay, first up, you've got super PACs. Think of these as the main engine for all this unlimited spending. They were basically born from that Citizens United decision, and they can take in just endless amounts of money from corporations, from individuals, to run ads and do other political stuff. The one big rule is they're not supposed to coordinate directly with a candidate's campaign.
And this is where the secrecy really kicks in. You have these so-called dark money groups. They're usually set up as nonprofits, like a 501c4. Now, the crucial part, the whole point really, is that under current law, they do not have to tell anyone where their money comes from. And that creates a perfect pipeline for anonymous money to get into the system. So here's the play-by-play. Step 1.
Some donor, maybe an individual or a corporation, gives an unlimited, undisclosed donation to one of these dark money groups. Step 2, that dark money group then turns around and contributes that cash to a super PAC. And finally, step 3, the super PAC spends it on ads to try and influence voters. And the original source of all that money, poof, completely hidden.
Okay, so what's the end game here? What does all this spending actually buy? Let's take a look at the real-world consequences, the actual return on this massive political investment. And the data on this is pretty striking. Academic studies actually looked at states that were forced to remove spending limits after Citizens United, and they found some really interesting things. The Republican share of seats in state legislatures went up by 5 percentage points. Corporate taxes got cut. A bunch of business-friendly laws were passed. The influence isn't just theoretical, it's measurable and it's direct. But there's a really powerful countercurrent starting to emerge, because as all this political spending becomes a little more visible, so does the risk for the companies that are doing this spending. Why? Because consumers, we're paying attention.
In fact, get this. Recent surveys show that political donations are now one of the leading reasons for consumer boycotts. Nearly a third of us say we've actually stopped supporting a business because of where its political money went. This creates a huge risk for companies when their spending suddenly doesn't line up with their public image, right?
And that misalignment, it can be incredibly damaging. Take Tesla, for example. Here's a company built entirely around sustainable energy, right? But it faced a ton of backlash when its CEO donated to candidates who are actively opposing EV incentives. Or think about Target. They're very public about their support for the LGBTQ community, but they got hit with boycotts after donating to a group that backed an anti-gay marriage candidate. The lesson here is pretty clear. When a company's words and their dollars don't line up, people notice.
So where does all this leave us? Well, the whole world of political spending is really at a crossroads now, and it's all defined by one central, really powerful conflict.
On one side of the ring, you've got this immense push from corporations and billionaires for political influence, to shape policy their way. But on the other side, you have this growing and very vocal demand from the public, from investors, from all of us as consumers, for transparency and accountability. And let me tell you, the concentration of power on that first side of the conflict is intense.
100. That's it. Just 100 billionaire donors contributed nearly 20% of all the money spent in the entire 2024 election. That is a level of concentrated financial power that was just unimaginable before that Citizens United ruling.
So, when a tiny handful of individuals and industries can spend billions of dollars, a lot of it in total secret, to shape our entire political landscape, it leaves us all with one final, really vital question to think about.